Hello YouTube, Sidekick here with the second promised installment of our first impressions video of the Su-25. Today we're looking at the T model, which is the one that comes free with the DCS download, so most of you have probably had a little look inside the cockpit. If you go back and look at the Su-25A model first impressions video, you'll see that there are already immediately differences that are apparent. The first of all is that we have a HUD, which we don't in the original model of the Su-25. The second is that, honestly, the cockpit is a bit more crowded. So both of these stem from the same effect, which was that the Su-25T was actually a B model, which was the two-seater model, that was upgraded to include a bunch of avionics where the second crew member used to sit. The net effect of this was an aircraft that was quite a bit heavier than the A model, but did have a much more modern and sophisticated avionics set. So today we'll take a look at what differences that really makes to the aircraft. The first of the differences the astute among you will have noted is that the aircraft obviously is a fair bit heavier. The takeoff roll was quite a bit longer in the T model than it was in our original A model. So you can already see the effect of the weight. And when you're sitting in the cockpit, you definitely, I don't know, the cockpit to me does feel more crowded. It feels like stuff has kind of been crammed in without there being any extra space accommodated for it. But in terms of performance, the differences are not dramatic. Once we're off the ground, it does perform in a similar fashion. This pitchback maneuver feels very much similar to the one in the A model. In fact, a lot of the differences are a little bit obscured by the fact that with a HUD, the plane is just flown quite differently than the A model. One of the things is that I'm finding it a lot easier to trim out the kind of vertical speed variations that were, I wasn't a challenge in the A model, but it was something different. It took a little bit of getting used to. It's a little bit easier to adapt with the way that the information is presented on the HUD. As you can see, we're doing the same kind of tests as we did in the A. I'm just doing an overspeed test and confirming that the aircraft really doesn't like you to exceed the never exceed speed by very much before it starts to misbehave. So that behavior has been continued. So as we did in the A model, we'll throttle back here a little bit. We'll get down to the maximum speed. We'll see how the aircraft does in a power climb. Okay, so we'll take it up. And it doesn't do badly in a climb. I would say that the pitch control is maybe a little softer than it is in the A model. It takes a little longer for the nose to come up, a little bit longer for it to stop coming up once you take the pressure off the stick. I would say it loses speed a little bit more in the climb. It's not enjoying rolling out aggressively at the top. We even get a little bit of a stall warning there, which I don't really think that maneuver was that much more aggressive than in the A model, but we had a little bit more trouble with it. So yeah, I would say that you feel a little bit like you're flying close to the edge of the envelope in the T model maybe than you do in the A model. Now we've skipped ahead a bit in time here. We're going to do the same low-level flight down the trench that I did in the A model and I've done in other aircraft. I just find this is a good way for me to be able to do kind of a one-to-one comparison. Just rolling over to dive down now. Yeah, overall the aircraft didn't really mind that maneuver. So it's not that it is insanely difficult to fly. But again, it is it does give one the feeling that you have to work pretty hard to stay ahead of the power curve sometimes. In straight and level flight, it's really not much of a handful, but you do feel like when you are making aggressive maneuvers, particularly aggressive maneuvers at the low end of the speed range, that lack of power makes it feel a little bit sluggish, I think would be a good way to put it. Okay, we're coming up on the trench. We're low, but not all that low. Carrying a fairly good bit of speed into the run, so we'll see how it does in low-level maneuvering. So the first thing I'm going to note is that in a turn, it does have a little bit more of a tendency to drop its nose, but even more to the point, I think, is it does seem to have a little bit of a tendency to start sinking even when the nose is high. And it requires sort of constant attention to the power to make sure that you're not starting to lose altitude. I would not have said that was a feature of the A model. For instance, you can see we're already a little bit lower here, and we've already bled off a fair bit of speed, even though those weren't really all that dramatic maneuver coming into the trench. In point of fact, I'm pulling back on the stick, and we're not going up as much as I kind of would like to, making this a slightly more exciting run. A little bit of a up-close and personal conversation with a tree there by the looks of it. Okay, just need to get used to this a little bit. You can see we're pulling a pretty strong angle of attack, almost 10 degrees, to keep the sink rate from going up. So that's a little bit different. I definitely feel like I'm putting more back pressure in, but I'm getting used to it. Getting our speed back up, which I think is helping a little bit as well. So fair to say that the T model doesn't seem to enjoy being low and slow as much as the A model did. It's manageable, but it is definitely a different experience, and it definitely feels heavier. As I said, there's definitely a feeling that you're having to work pretty hard to stay ahead of the power curve, because you still have those engines that are not all that responsive. And when they're carrying a lot more weight, when your speed starts to drop, as I said, your sink rate seems to go up pretty quickly, and you find yourself pulling back, raising the angle of attack, and it not having as much effect as you kind of expect it to without also adding power to the engine. So I'd say that's kind of the combined effect of what's going on. It's certainly manageable once you know to expect it, but it does, I think, reinforce kind of why the T model has, as has been said, a bit of a reputation for flying, rather like a brick. Okay, we're rolling in on our favorite little bridge here. We'll see how the dive and recovery feels. The climb again wasn't bad, but again, probably not quite as sporty as the A model, for sure. Definitely feels, when we get down into the low speed range, you definitely feel like you're working a lot harder to get response. Dives nicely. It's not out of control. It's good. It's firm. It's stable. And it doesn't really mind pulling out at the bottom. So overall, I wouldn't classify that as having been any issues with the dive and approach performance. So as per usual, we're just going to turn around and fly back up the trench. I'm getting to feel a little bit more comfortable now that I get a little bit of a handle on how she handles, as it were. One thing is definitely true, you definitely want to keep the speed up. And the other thing is that you definitely want to be prepared to get that. Once the speed does go down, I think you really want to keep the angle of attack, expect to keep the angle of attack up a little bit to keep that sink rate from coming in. But even as you can see now, an angle of attack is 0, and we're driving. Now, I can't compare this directly to the A model because it didn't have a HUD to compare the angle of attack to, but I think that's the thing that feels different to me. I feel like I'm having to pull the nose up all the time, even when I feel like I should be kind of in a neutral position. And again, this particularly becomes true when the speed drops down anywhere under 500 kilometers an hour. Okay, going around the corner here. Definitely haven't lost the non-fly-by-wire feeling. Definitely standing on the rudder. Getting a little bit of that sort of oscillatory behavior you get, which is typical when you're controlling the flight surfaces directly. But I feel a little bit more comfortable now that I'm used to it. But it definitely, it flies heavier than the A model. Like I said, I keep saying the feeling is you just feel a little bit like you're chasing the aircraft a little bit more than you are in the A model. Yeah, oops, here's a good example of that. I kind of pulled a little farther into that corner than I was expecting to. We can get out of that, though. But we do have to pull pretty hard. And there you can see if we pull pretty hard, the nose drops, but I think the sink rate's even higher than you'd expect for the nose drop. So yeah, it's an aircraft that requires you to be thinking ahead of it. Certainly more so than the A model, and definitely more so than more modern, more powerful jets. So you have to conserve the airspeed that you have. You have to conserve the power that you have. It's there. But you don't want the aircraft to get ahead of you, which I think it would be easy for it to do, and that's kind of unfortunate, making this kind of a first jet experience for a pilot in DCS, because those are the kinds of things that I think you learn more of when you get some experience flying jets, which you wouldn't expect someone coming to DCS to necessarily have that experience. So I can see why the T model has a bit of a reputation as being a difficult plane to fly for a novice to DCS. I'm not sure it would have been my choice for the first aircraft to present pilots with. But that doesn't mean that it won't be a lot of fun to fly, because the one thing we haven't looked at today is, frankly, the astonishing amount of weapons that the aircraft can deploy, and the modern avionics that uses to do that. So I am really looking forward to flying the T, and I'm looking forward to learning how to use it to its best abilities. But there's no question that it's going to take a little bit more to stay ahead of it. So for now, this is going to be Sidekick, signing off.